Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. It was a Wednesday night in late November 2021, and Portland had that kind of cold that seeps into everything. The kind that hangs in the air after rain. Damp, heavy, faintly metallic. I was living alone then, in a small rented duplex off SE 43rd Avenue. The place wasn't bad. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, old baseboard heaters that clicked when they warmed up. I'd only been there for about 3 months, still half unpacked. Still figuring out which creaks belonged to the house and which didn't. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older homes, chain-link fences, a few rental units like mine. That night I'd gone to bed around midnight. I remember because I was scrolling through my phone, reading about a landslide near the coast, and the rain outside was so steady that I left the window cracked open just to listen. It was one of those steady Pacific Northwest rains that sounds like static. No thunder, just a quiet hiss against the pavement and leaves. Sometime after 2 in the morning, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. It was metallic, sharp, like something dropping onto concrete. My first thought was that it was just something sliding off the roof, maybe a loose gutter or a branch hitting the trash can. But then it came again. Not quite a clang, more like the sound of a pipe or crowbar hitting the ground, and then rolling a little before stopping. I opened my eyes, but I didn't move. My room faced the driveway, so any sound outside came through clearly. The rain had lightened, just a light drizzle now, and through the quiet I heard 3 slow knocks on the front door. Not pounding, not hesitant either, just deliberate. 1 pause, 2 pause, 3. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. My mind started trying to reason through it. Maybe it was a neighbor, someone drunk, someone who got the wrong door. I waited for a 4th knock. It didn't come. The only sound was the rain tapping the gutters again. I turned slightly toward the nightstand where my phone was charging. The screen said 2:17 a.m. I opened the Ring app automatically, but I remembered too late that the Wi-Fi had gone out earlier in the evening because of the storm. I'd meant to reset the router before bed, but never did. The camera was useless. I felt my heart beat in my ears, that kind of thick silence where every small sound feels too loud. Then the knocks came again, slower this time. 3 again, spaced out, almost like whoever was there wanted me to hear each one. I could feel my palms getting cold. I stayed completely still, just listening. And then came something worse. Whispering. It wasn't at the door anymore. It was from the side of the house, the direction of the kitchen window. It wasn't clear words, just the faint rhythm of breath mixed with low murmuring, like someone trying to keep quiet while talking to themselves. I strained to hear if it was one voice or more than one. It was too soft to tell. I wanted to get up and look, but my bedroom door was open, and from my bed I could see straight down the hallway to where the kitchen light switch was. Beyond that was just the dark outline of the window blinds. The thought of walking past that window, knowing someone might be right outside it, made my stomach turn. So I stayed in bed. I kept my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over 911, but I hesitated. What would I even say? Someone was knocking and whispering outside my house in the middle of the night? It felt too uncertain, like it would be over before anyone could even get there. Minutes dragged by. I kept glancing at the clock. 2:22, 2:27, 2:35. The whispering never got loud, but it didn't stop. Every so often I thought I heard the sound of light movement, like feet shifting on wet pavement, or clothing brushing against the siding. The heater kicked on at one point, making me flinch. I almost laughed at myself, but the sound outside didn't change. It was steady, patient. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. Around 2:40, the whispering finally stopped. No footsteps walking away. Just silence again, broken only by the soft patter of rain. I stayed completely still, listening for any other noise. A car starting, gravel crunching, anything. Nothing came. I don't remember falling asleep again, but I must have dozed off at some point because when I opened my eyes, the sky was gray and light was seeping in through the blinds. The clock said 7:19. I felt heavy, my muscles tight from staying frozen in one position for hours. For a few minutes I stayed there, trying to convince myself that it was all just some strange dream. But I knew it wasn't. The sounds had been too sharp, too real. I got out of bed and walked slowly down the hall. The house was cold, the hardwood creaked under my feet, and I could hear the faint hum of the fridge, the normal morning sounds that felt almost too normal after that night. I went to the front door first. The doormat was soaked, but there was nothing unusual. No packages, no footprints I could see. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just enough to look around. The street was empty. A few cars parked along the curb, rainwater running down the gutter. Then I went to the kitchen. The blinds were half open and I could see the small concrete patio in back. It was wet, covered in a thin layer of fallen leaves. I unlocked the back door and stepped out barefoot. The air was cold enough to bite my skin. That's when I saw them. 2 wet footprints on the concrete. Bare feet, clear as day. They were side by side, pointed toward the door. The rain had softened them a little, but the shape was obvious. Long, narrow, toes spread slightly. Adult-sized. I looked around the yard. The fence that separated my half of the duplex from the neighbors was about 5 feet high. Wood, old but sturdy. There was a small gate that led to the alley behind the house, and it was closed. Latch still hooked. I walked over and checked the ground near it. Mud, no prints. Whoever it was hadn't come or gone through there. Not recently, anyway. I crouched and looked closer at the footprints again. They weren't mine. The heel marks were deeper, and the spacing of the toes was different. Whoever it was had been standing right there, just a few feet from where I was lying in bed hours earlier. For a while, I just stood there, staring at them, trying to make sense of it. No shoes in the cold rain. No sign of anyone forcing the doors, no scratches on the locks, nothing taken. Just 2 bare footprints on wet concrete. I called the property manager later that morning, told him about what I'd heard. He said sometimes people cut through the alley behind the duplex. Maybe someone drunk or high got confused. He said it like it was nothing. I wanted to believe that, but the deliberate knocks didn't fit that. The whispering didn't fit that. That night, I reset the Wi-Fi, checked the Ring app, and made sure the camera was working again. I scrolled back through the previous night's footage before the connection had dropped. The last saved clip was from 8:42 p.m., a delivery guy dropping off a package, headlights sweeping across the driveway. After that, nothing. I started keeping a flashlight and a small knife on my nightstand, not because I thought I'd use them, but because it felt better to have something nearby. For weeks after, I woke up at every small sound. Wind through the trees, the neighbor's car door, the mail slot rattling. A month later, I moved out. It wasn't because of what happened. At least that's what I told people. The rent went up and it was reason enough to find somewhere else. But I still think about those footprints sometimes. How they faced or how long they might have been standing there in the rain before I woke. Then how the whispering stopped all at once. Not because they left, but because they realized I was awake. I used to babysit for a nurse who worked night shifts at a hospital in Oak Park, Illinois. It was one of those quiet residential streets with big maple trees and old houses that all looked the same in the dark. The house was a 2-story duplex, narrow but deep, with creaky stairs and a long hallway upstairs that always smelled faintly like baby powder and laundry detergent. I'd been babysitting there for about 4 months. The mom, Claire, usually left around 6:30 p.m. after feeding the baby and changing her into pajamas. The dad worked out of town most weeks, so it was just her and the baby. The baby, her name was Ella, was always asleep by 8. After that, the house would fall completely silent. I usually sat on the couch downstairs with the baby monitor next to me, flipping through shows on Netflix until midnight. They had one of those Wi-Fi baby monitors that connected to your phone and also had a small screen receiver you could carry around. The video quality was surprisingly good, clear enough that you could see the baby's tiny chest rising and falling as she slept. It even had motion and sound alerts that sent notifications to your phone. The first few times I babysat there, I kept the volume on low because it would sometimes pick up faint noises from outside. Cars, the neighbor's dog barking, the house settling. Nothing strange, just normal suburban night sounds. That particular night was in early March 2021, a Wednesday. The weather had started to warm up a little, but it was still chilly enough that you could see your breath outside. The air in the house felt still, heavy, like the furnace had been running too long. I remember the faint hum of it coming from the vent under the living room window. I had just made myself a cup of tea and was halfway through a documentary when the baby monitor lit up on its own. It made a small clicking sound first. Then the little screen flickered from black to gray. The motion sensor icon blinked red in the corner. I waited to hear something, but there was no sound, just the low hiss of white noise that came through when the mic was open. I leaned closer. The baby was asleep, curled up on her side in the crib with her blanket pulled halfway up. Everything looked fine, except in the far right corner of the video there was a faint movement. It was small, like a shadow shifting. I thought maybe the curtains had moved, or the camera was adjusting its exposure. I watched it for a few seconds, and then the light level on the screen changed. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The door to the baby's room, the one I always kept closed, was slightly open. Not much, just a few inches, but enough to see the line of light from the hallway spilling in. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to remember if I had left it like that. I was sure I hadn't. The parents were very particular about keeping it shut so their golden retriever, Max, wouldn't wander in and lick the baby's face. I could hear the dog downstairs, asleep in his bed by the back door, his collar tag occasionally jingling as he shifted. I got up, grabbed the monitor, and went upstairs. The floorboards creaked under my socks. The hallway light was dim, just a single bulb. The air up there felt cooler, and I could hear the low static sound from the baby monitor echoing faintly from my phone. When I reached the nursery, the door was closed, completely shut tight against the frame. I froze there for a few seconds, not wanting to make any noise. The baby didn't stir. Everything inside was quiet except for the steady hum of the white noise machine next to her crib. I stood there long enough to convince myself I'd probably imagined the door being open. Maybe the monitor glitched. Maybe the camera angle was off. I shut off the hallway light, went back downstairs, and tried to shake it off. But when I got back to the couch, the monitor screen was frozen. The image hadn't changed since I left. The little motion icon in the corner had turned gray. I tapped it a few times, unplugged it, then plugged it back in. It blinked, refreshed, and the live feed came back. Baby still sleeping, everything calm again. I tried to focus on my show after that, but I kept glancing at the monitor every few minutes. The house made random noises, the furnace kicking on, the dog sighing, an occasional pop from the old wood framing. But every sound felt sharper now, more distinct. Around midnight, I had just started thinking about packing up when my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected, nursery. The time was 12:03 a.m. I opened the app immediately. The screen loaded for a second and then showed the same room, but this time the crib was empty. The blanket was pushed to one side. The little mobile above the crib was spinning slowly. I froze completely, staring at the screen, unable to even breathe. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted up the stairs 2 at a time, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The nursery door was still shut. I grabbed the handle and pushed it open so hard it hit the wall. The baby was right there, asleep in the same position as before. Nothing had moved. The blanket, the toys, everything was just as it had been. I looked at the monitor in my hand. The screen now showed the same live image, perfectly normal. It took me a second to notice the small text at the bottom of the screen. The timestamp. It wasn't 12:03 a.m. It said 8:47 p.m. The clip I'd just seen had been recorded earlier that night, but the app had displayed it as if it were live. My phone showed live in red at the top when it popped up. That was what had thrown me off. I remember standing there, my hands shaking, the air feeling thick and heavy. I checked the app again, scrolled through the stored clips, and sure enough, there was the recording. Motion triggered around 8:47, when I'd been downstairs making tea. The baby had briefly shifted in her sleep and rolled over, pushing the blanket away. That was it. But for some reason, the app had pushed that old clip as a live alert at 12:03. I didn't understand how that could happen. I'd used that camera many times before, and the live and recorded feeds were always separate. I even double-checked the Wi-Fi connection and restarted the monitor, but nothing explained it. The signal seemed fine, strong connection, no interference. I stayed up for another hour after that, sitting perfectly still, listening to every small noise in that house until Claire came home around 2 a.m. When she got back, I told her everything. The motion alerts, the door, the delayed video. I remember her face changed slightly when I mentioned the timestamp, but she didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly, said something like, "Yeah, that camera's been acting weird lately." She didn't elaborate. I didn't push it. I packed my things and left, feeling uneasy the entire drive home. A few days later, she texted me asking if I could babysit again the following weekend. I told her I had another commitment. It wasn't true, but I didn't want to go back there. Something about that house didn't sit right with me anymore. Weeks later, I ran into a mutual acquaintance who mentioned that Claire had hired a new sitter. She said the last girl before me had quit suddenly, and I asked if she knew why. She just said, "I think it had something to do with that camera system." I didn't ask more, but that stuck with me. I kept wondering what acting weird actually meant, because cameras don't just replay live footage on their own. Someone has to access it, someone has to send it. I never told anyone else about that night, but every once in a while, when I think about that frozen screen and the way the door looked slightly open in that grainy gray image, I still feel that same uneasy chill. I can't say for sure what was happening, but I do know this: the monitor wasn't just glitching. It was connected to something or someone who had access to those recordings. Someone who had been watching them in real time. And the worst part is, I still remember the moment when the light adjusted on that first alert and the door appeared open. Because for half a second before the screen froze, it looked like the faint outline of someone's shoulder was visible in the crack, just enough to make me think someone had been standing there, watching quietly before the door closed again. I never went back to that house. I was back home for the summer in 2018, house-sitting for my parents while they spent a few weeks down in Florida. Their house sits in a quiet neighborhood outside Richmond, the kind of place where every driveway looks the same, and nothing ever really happens. I had just finished my first year out of college and was still figuring out what to do next. The plan was simple: take care of the house, collect their mail, water the plants, and feed their cat Milo. Easy. Those first few nights were quiet. The air was thick and heavy, one of those humid Virginia Julys where the heat never really lets up, even after sunset. The air conditioner ran constantly, filling the house with that steady mechanical hum that becomes background noise after a while. The smell of the house, faint detergent, old wood, and my mom's lavender plug-ins was something I hadn't realized I missed until then. Their place has one of those small, pull-down attic ladders in the hallway between the bedrooms. It's a simple setup: a square wooden hatch with a thin cord dangling from the center. You pull it down, the stairs fold out, and it leads up into a cramped, unfinished attic lined with pink insulation and a single light bulb hanging from a cord. It's not a space anyone uses. My dad had boxes up there, old tax documents, some Christmas decorations, a few bins of my childhood stuff, but otherwise it just sat empty. The first time I heard it was around 1 in the morning. I'd been lying in bed half watching something on my laptop when I caught the sound. It was faint but distinct, a dull, dragging scrape directly above my room. I paused the video. It stopped. Then it started again, a slow scrape, like something heavy being shifted slightly across the plywood flooring up there. At first, I thought it might be an animal. Maybe a raccoon or a possum had somehow gotten in through a vent. But after listening a while, it didn't sound like that. It wasn't the scurrying or scratching of claws. It was heavier, slower, almost intentional, like someone dragging a knee or a shoe. I got up, grabbed the broom that leaned against the corner of my room and tapped the ceiling twice. The sound stopped immediately. Total silence, except for the air conditioner. I stood there for a while, waiting, but nothing. I eventually went back to bed, telling myself it was probably wood contracting or something normal. The house had always made little noises, especially with the temperature changes. I didn't think much more about it until the next morning. When I walked out into the hallway, the first thing I noticed was the cord to the attic ladder hanging down. I froze for a second. It hadn't been like that the night before. I would have noticed. It usually rests flush against the ceiling, completely out of sight, unless you pull it down. I stood there for a good minute, just staring at it. Milo rubbed against my leg, meowing for breakfast. And the normalcy of that sound pulled me out of it. I reached up, pushed the cord back up until it stuck to the ceiling again, and told myself there was a draft from the AC vent that maybe nudged it loose. I didn't really believe it, but I didn't want to start the day thinking about weird stuff. The next few days were normal. I worked on my laptop, made dinner, watched movies, tried to enjoy the quiet. Every now and then, though, I'd catch myself glancing at the hallway ceiling. I started keeping my bedroom door shut at night. Then 2 nights later, it happened again, only worse. It was close to midnight. I had just finished brushing my teeth. The mirror fogged a little from the shower earlier. When I turned off the bathroom light, I noticed something strange in the reflection. The hallway behind me had a faint orange glow. It wasn't bright, but it was enough to see the edges of light spilling across the floorboards. I turned around. The attic light was on. I stood completely still for a few seconds, staring at the square of soft light bleeding around the edges of the hatch. I knew for a fact that light hadn't been on in years. The switch is one of those little pull cords you have to physically tug while you're up there. I felt my heart pick up. My first thought was maybe my dad had some motion sensor installed up there I didn't know about. Then I remembered how old that attic light was. No sensors, no automation, just a single bare bulb. I grabbed my phone from the counter and turned on the flashlight. The house felt unnaturally quiet. Even the air conditioner seemed to have gone silent for a moment, like the air itself was holding still. I stepped into the hallway. The cord to the attic was down again. It hung there perfectly straight, just barely swaying. I don't know what made me do it, but I reached up and pulled it down. The wooden ladder unfolded with that familiar creak and thump against the floor. I shined my phone light up the narrow tunnel. The orange glow from the bulb filled the space, washing everything in that dim, dusty hue. The air coming from above was warm and still. It smelled like insulation, old wood, and dust. I climbed up just high enough to get my head above the ceiling line. The bulb was swinging slightly, like it had been bumped a few moments before. The motion was slow, steady, and rhythmic. I scanned the attic. Nothing moved. The shadows stayed still. But near the center of the floor, on the insulation, I saw it. 2 clear knee impressions and a single handprint pressed into the dust. Not old ones either. The outlines were sharp. You could even see where the fingertips had disturbed the insulation fibers. The spacing looked exactly how someone would position themselves if they were kneeling, bracing with one hand. I stayed there for maybe 10 seconds, not breathing. Then I climbed down, folded the ladder back up, and pushed the hatch shut. I stood under it for a long time, broom in hand again, just listening. Nothing, only the faint hum of the AC starting up again. That night I barely slept. Every noise the house made, every creak, every vibration, made my pulse jump. Around 3 in the morning, I finally got up and checked every door and window, making sure they were locked. They were. Milo followed me the whole time, his tail puffed up like he sensed something off too. The next morning, I called a local pest control company. The guy came out around noon, checked the attic thoroughly, and found nothing. No droppings, no signs of animals, no entry points. He told me flatly that whatever had been up there wasn't a raccoon or anything like that. He didn't have much else to say. After he left, I went back into the hallway. The cord was hanging down again. That's when I decided I wasn't taking chances. I got a screwdriver from the garage and drove 4 long wood screws into the corners of the hatch, sealing it shut. It looked ugly, but I didn't care. For the rest of the summer, I never heard another sound from up there. The house went back to normal. The hum of the AC, the tick of the kitchen clock, Milo's lazy afternoon naps. Everything just felt ordinary again. But even with the screws in place, I still avoided that hallway at night. When my parents got back in August, I told them I'd heard animals in the attic and sealed it shut for safety. My dad laughed and said he'd take care of it later. To this day, it's still screwed closed. Last year, I visited again for Thanksgiving. Same house, same smell, same hum from the vents. I walked down that hallway to grab something from the linen closet, and out of habit, I looked up. The attic hatch was exactly as I'd left it, sealed, untouched. But I noticed something new this time. Around the edges of the wood, faint streaks in the paint ran downward, like someone had dragged their fingers along the hatch trying to pull it open from the other side. They were old, maybe dust or moisture stains, maybe just the wood settling. But the marks were there, 5 thin streaks, starting from the center and trailing toward the ceiling frame. I never said anything to my parents. They still sleep in that house every night, and that attic door is still screwed shut. I lived alone in a small basement apartment near Christie Pitts Park in Toronto. The place was below street level, and my front window lined up perfectly with the sidewalk. When people walked by, I only ever saw them from the knees down. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at their shoes as they passed. Sneakers, boots, sandals. Each one a quick, anonymous glimpse of a stranger's life. At night, the window felt more like a screen than a view. The glass reflected the glow from my TV, and the dim streetlights outside barely reached down that far. It was in early March when the first thing happened. The weather was still cold enough that the windows stayed shut most of the time, and the air inside always felt a little damp. That night, it was around 11 p.m. I was sitting on the couch watching a show, not really paying attention, just letting the noise fill the space. Out of habit, I glanced at the window. For a second, I thought I saw movement in the reflection. Just the faintest outline of something standing outside. It wasn't the usual blur of someone walking by. It was still. Perfectly still. I muted the TV and just sat there. The hum of the fridge in the kitchen sounded louder in the silence. I stared at the reflection, trying to make out what I was seeing. I couldn't tell if it was a trick of the light, or if someone was actually standing there on the sidewalk. The figure didn't move for a long time. I remember counting to 30 in my head. Then a minute, then maybe 2. My heart was pounding, but I didn't want to move too fast. Finally, I stood up, walked quietly over, and pulled the curtain back just a little. There was nothing there. Just the empty sidewalk, a bit of melting snow near the curb, and the faint glow of the streetlight down the block. No one walking, no shadows moving. I closed the curtain again and stood there for another minute listening. I didn't hear footsteps or any sound at all from outside. It was just quiet. I told myself it was a reflection from a passing car, or maybe someone's shadow from across the street. I tried to believe that. For the next few nights, I kept catching myself looking toward that window, half expecting to see something again. I even rearranged my couch slightly so I wouldn't face it directly. It wasn't fear exactly, more of a steady unease that stayed in the back of my mind. My building was small, just 3 units stacked vertically. I didn't know the people upstairs well, just nodded to them when I passed. The hallway that led to my unit always smelled faintly of dust and detergent, and at night, it echoed when someone walked through. A few days later, I got home from work around 9. It was still chilly outside, that damp kind of cold that clings to your clothes. I unlocked the gate that led down to my entrance, a few concrete steps below the sidewalk, and immediately noticed something on the window frame. There was a small folded piece of paper wedged between the glass and the outer metal grate. I thought maybe it was a flyer or some junk ad someone had slipped in. But when I pulled it out, I saw handwriting. It said in small, neat letters, "I can see what you're watching." That was all. No name, no other words, just that. I stood there for a while in the cold, reading it again and again. The handwriting was strange, not messy, not rushed, calm, careful. I looked up and down the street, but it was empty. A streetcar passed in the distance, and for a second the lights reflected off the window, making it impossible to see beyond the glass. Inside, I put the note on my counter and just stared at it. The paper was folded neatly, not torn or crumpled. Whoever wrote it had taken their time, checked the window again, made sure it was locked, and even pushed the latch a few extra times to be sure. The grate outside had small screws holding it in place. Someone had to kneel right by the glass to wedge something in. The idea of that made my skin crawl. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat in silence, listening to the faint sounds from upstairs. Footsteps, a door closing, water running. Every now and then, I'd glance toward the window, watching the shadows of passing cars flicker across the wall. Around midnight, I thought I heard something soft outside. A faint crunch like a shoe shifting on gravel. It was so quiet I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. The next morning, I called my landlord. He lived in another building nearby and usually handled things quickly. When I told him about the note, his tone changed. He said there had been a few complaints recently. People in the area had seen a man crouching near basement windows late at night, sometimes just standing there, sometimes moving from one house to another. No one had ever caught him. He'd always disappear before anyone could confront him. The landlord said he'd report it again, maybe ask the superintendent to check the security light outside my steps. After that, I started keeping the curtains closed all the time. Even during the day, I didn't like the idea of people being able to see in, even from the knees down. I'd walk by that window and imagine eyes right on the other side of the glass. It got to the point where every sound outside made me tense up. Footsteps, dogs, the rumble of a stroller wheel. One night in late March, I woke up around 3 in the morning. I didn't know why at first, just that something had pulled me out of sleep. I lay there listening. My room was silent except for the low hum of the baseboard heater. Then I heard it again, that faint crunching sound right outside the window. Slow, deliberate, someone shifting their weight. I didn't move for a long time. My bed was only a few feet from the wall, and I could see a thin line of light where the curtain didn't fully meet the frame. I watched that strip of light, waiting for any shadow or motion. Nothing. After maybe 10 minutes, I slowly got up and went to the bathroom, pretending not to look at the window. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something dark against the glass, but when I turned to look, it was gone. In the morning, I went outside before work. There were faint footprints in the damp patch of dirt near the steps. 2 distinct impressions close to the window. The ground there didn't hold marks for long. Someone had been standing there recently. For the next week, I barely slept. I started keeping a kitchen knife on my nightstand, even though I knew how ridiculous that sounded. Every creak of the building made me flinch. Started getting home later, just to avoid being in the apartment too long by myself. I noticed that other basement windows on the street had new locks or boards covering them. A few neighbors mentioned a man seen watching from across the park at night, always alone, always still. By May, I couldn't take it anymore. The constant tension, the quiet dread every time I walked down those steps. Even during the day, I'd check over my shoulder before unlocking my door. The city was waking up with spring, but that apartment stayed cold and heavy, like it belonged to another season. The week I moved out, I took one last look around. The window still had a faint smudge on the outside of the glass at about eye level. A handprint maybe, or just dirt, I couldn't tell. I didn't want to think about it too much. I folded the note one last time and left it on the counter for the landlord to see. When I stepped out for the last time, I looked back down the narrow set of concrete steps. The window was dark, and for a second, I caught my own reflection in it. It looked almost the same as that night in March. Still, unmoving, watching from the other side. I worked nights from home during the first year of the pandemic, in 2020. My job was doing IT troubleshooting for a logistics company that ran warehouses across the country. Most of my shift was remote access work, resetting credentials, diagnosing router issues, clearing software errors. It was quiet, repetitive, and the only sound in my small one-bedroom duplex was the low hum of my desktop fan and the clicking of my keyboard. I lived alone then, in a rented place just outside Eugene, Oregon. The duplex had a small front porch with one camera pointing toward the steps and a motion light above the door. I kept the security app on my second monitor, mostly for comfort. It gave me a sense of control, something to break the stillness of the long nights. Around midnight one night in late September, I decided to take a short break. I got up, stretched, poured myself a glass of water, and sat back down. Without thinking much about it, I opened the home security app just to glance at the live feed. The screen showed my empty porch, the concrete steps, the railing, the faint reflection of the streetlight across the road. It was perfectly still, like always. Then, as I blinked, the feed flickered once. For just a second, a person appeared in frame, standing sideways, almost turned toward my front door. Then gone. It was so fast I wasn't even sure I'd seen it. Just one single frame. I froze for a moment, staring at the image, trying to replay it in my head. The shape was tall, or maybe it just looked that way because of how close it was to the camera. The body had no distinct features, just a dark outline, like someone leaning in slightly, caught mid-movement. I immediately scrolled back through the timeline and replayed that section. From 12:04:20 to 12:04:21, everything looked normal. Then at 12:04:22, the figure appeared for exactly one frame. 12:04:24, the porch light flicked on by motion sensor. Bright white light flooding the screen, but there was nothing there. The steps were empty again. My first thought was that it was a glitch. Maybe the app froze. Maybe some kind of compression artifact. I'd seen weird frames before when the Wi-Fi lagged, but they never looked that human. Still, I told myself that had to be it. I sat there for a while longer, the cold light from the monitors washing over the room. I remember my throat feeling tight and dry, my chest rising faster than usual. After a few minutes, I got up and went to the front window. I pushed aside the curtain just a little. The porch light was still on, casting a harsh white glow over the concrete. Everything looked exactly how it should. No movement, no sound from outside except the faint noise of cars in the distance. I went back to my desk, but I couldn't focus on work anymore. Every time I opened another ticket or typed a command, my eyes drifted back to the corner of the monitor, where the security app sat open. I rewound the footage again, this time pausing on the exact second it happened. The timestamp was burned into my mind, 12:04:22. I leaned closer to the screen, zoomed in, tried to adjust the brightness, but the app didn't have much control over playback. The frame was there, but it was grainy. It didn't look like an error. It looked like a person, blurred by motion, their head turned slightly toward the door. At 12:04:24, the light came on, but there was no movement captured that could have triggered it. Usually when a cat walked by or even a branch swayed, I'd see the cause. This time, nothing. A little before 1, I decided to check the camera's local backup. I had a small SD card in it that recorded continuously. I went outside with a flashlight, the air cold and still, and crouched down under the porch light to eject the card. The neighborhood was silent, most houses dark. When I walked out, the motion light had clicked off, so when it suddenly turned on again as I stepped closer, it made me flinch. Inside, I plugged the card into my laptop and started going through the files. The footage was clear, time-stamped, easy to scroll through. I found the segment around 12:04 and watched closely. The porch empty. The time ticked past 12:04:21, then 12:04:22, and nothing. No flicker, no figure, no glitch. The next change in the footage was at 12:04:24, when the light came on. The one frame I'd seen on the live feed simply wasn't there. I replayed that minute over and over, thinking maybe the local file skipped a frame. But the data rate was smooth. No dropouts, no evidence of corruption. The feed I saw online had shown something that the physical recording didn't. The idea bothered me in a way I couldn't shake. I had worked in IT long enough to know what compression errors look like, what latency and packet loss can cause. This didn't fit. It wasn't a half-loaded frame or a stretched pixel. It looked like a real image, just one that shouldn't exist. I stayed up the rest of the night, mostly watching the feed. Every hour I checked it, rewound it, stared at the same timestamp. By 3 a.m., I'd convinced myself it must have been some kind of lagged cache image. Maybe a bug where the camera briefly showed an older frame from another time. But that didn't make me feel any better. If that were true, then who had been standing on my porch before? The next morning, I walked outside again, this time in daylight. I looked around carefully. The small concrete steps had a thin layer of dust and a few leaves. I could see where the mail carrier usually stepped, but there were no fresh prints, no smudges near the railing. I walked down to the driveway, checked under the windows, looked across the street. Everything was ordinary. I told myself it was over, that I should just delete the footage and move on, but I didn't. I saved it instead. A short clip I named Porch Glitch. For the next few days, I kept watching the feed just to make sure. Every night I'd check the timestamp at 12:04, and nothing ever happened. It became almost a routine. The fear faded, replaced by curiosity, like I was running a test. A week later, something else happened. Not as dramatic, but it shook me more than the first. I was working again, another late shift. Around 2:30 a.m., the feed flickered just once. Not a figure this time, just a short burst of static. Then the image froze for half a second before returning to normal. Right after that, the porch light came on again. I walked to the front window. The porch was empty, but I noticed something new. On the top step, near the corner, there was a small dark spot, like dirt or water. I went outside and looked closer. It was a partial footprint, heel and arch visible, facing the door. The edges were faint, but it was clearly a bare foot. The air was cold that night, barely above 50 degrees. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself it was my own from earlier. But the size was wrong, larger than mine. I took a picture, wiped it away with a paper towel, and went back inside. I checked every lock, every window, every latch. I turned off the lights and sat in the living room, listening. The next morning, I checked the footage again. On the local recording, the moment when the porch light turned on was still there, but again, no movement appeared before it. No glitch, no static, just an empty porch and then light. I contacted the camera company's support the following week, mostly to ask if there were known issues with single-frame artifacts on the live feed. They gave me a vague answer about packet loss and suggested resetting the device. I did that, changed my Wi-Fi password, even repositioned the router. But the thought stayed with me, that whatever I'd seen, it had existed only in that instant of transmission, something that appeared for me and no one else. In the months after, I switched to a daytime shift. I stopped checking the feed as often, though the app was still there on my phone. Every once in a while, I'd glance at it out of habit. Nothing strange ever showed up again. Sometimes when I think back on it, I tell myself it had to be a glitch. Maybe the frame was borrowed from an earlier clip, or some temporary image burn caused by the sensor. But there's a small part of me that can't forget how deliberate the posture looked. Someone standing close, turned toward the door, like they were listening. And the fact that when I checked the local recording, that moment didn't exist at all. It's what unsettles me the most. It's been years now, but I still have that file saved. Just a 1-second clip of an empty porch, a timestamp at 12:04:22, and a blank frame that I can't ever replay again. I never figured out what happened that night, but every time the motion light outside flicks on for no reason, I find myself staring at the door, waiting for the feed to catch up, half expecting to see that shape again, just for one frame. I rented that studio flat in Hackney in early 2021, right after a breakup. It was a small place on a quiet street lined with narrow townhouses, all converted into separate flats. Mine was on the top floor. One big room with slanted ceilings, a kitchenette by the window, and a small bathroom tucked in the corner. The kind of place that always smelled faintly like old plaster and damp carpet, no matter how much you cleaned. The landlord was a man named Peter, middle-aged, polite but hurried. He showed me around in under 5 minutes. I remember him saying, almost as an afterthought, "That door stays locked," pointing to a second door next to my bed. He said it was just a sealed storage closet from when the building used to be a full house. I didn't think much about it. Old houses in London have strange layouts. I just nodded, signed the lease, and moved in. The first few months were uneventful. I worked from home most days, sitting by the window where I could see the street. At night, I'd hear the usual city noises, a bus passing, the occasional siren, or neighbors through thin walls. The flat had quirks like every old place does. The pipes clanked when I turned on the tap. The fridge hummed unevenly. The floorboards near the bed creaked if I stepped on them just right. The door to the sealed closet didn't bother me at first. It was painted the same off-white as the walls, with a basic brass handle that didn't turn. I hung a jacket on a hook near it and basically forgot it existed. But sometimes when I was trying to fall asleep, I'd find myself glancing toward it. There was something unsettling about a locked door you didn't have the key to, especially one that opened only from your room. The first strange sound came about 4 months in. It was late, maybe 3 in the morning. I'd fallen asleep with my laptop still on the bed, some dull documentary playing quietly. I woke up suddenly like I'd heard something that didn't belong. The room was dim from the streetlight filtering through the curtains. I listened. Nothing. Then, a few seconds later, I heard it again, a soft thud, like something shifting against the floor behind that locked door. It was faint but clear. A slow, uneven rustling followed, like fabric brushing against the floorboards. It lasted only a few seconds, then stopped completely. I sat there in bed, frozen. The sound wasn't coming from the wall or the floor below. It was definitely from inside that small room. After a while, I convinced myself it was probably just the building settling. Maybe a rat or something had gotten into the sealed space. Old houses have gaps and cracks everywhere. Still, I couldn't shake it off. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called Peter. I told him what I'd heard. He sounded puzzled but calm, said there was no way anyone could get in there. The room had been sealed off years ago when they converted the house, but he agreed to come by with a key, just to ease your mind. He came that afternoon. It was a gray, drizzly day, and the air inside felt damp. He unlocked the door while I stood a few steps back. The hinges squealed a bit when it opened. The room was tiny, maybe 6 by 6 feet. No windows. Just dusty walls, cracked plaster, and a few old cleaning supplies, a vacuum cleaner, a mop bucket, and some folded cardboard boxes. The air inside was stale and dry. He even tapped on the walls and floor to show there was nothing behind them. He shrugged, said sometimes houses make strange noises, and locked the door again. I tried to believe him. That night I went to bed early, feeling a bit foolish for overreacting, but right around 3 a.m. I woke up again. At first it was the same kind of sound, soft shifting, like someone adjusting their weight on the floorboards inside that little room. Then the air changed. It's hard to describe exactly, but the smell hit me. Faint at first, then stronger. It was sweet, but not in a pleasant way. More like the smell of fruit that's gone bad, with a metallic edge to it. I lay there breathing shallowly, staring at the bottom of that door, where the faint glow from my laptop charger light outlined a thin strip of shadow. I could see something darker seeping along the gap. Not liquid, but maybe the shadow shifting as something moved inside. I wanted to tell myself it was my imagination, but the smell was real. I could taste it, sickly, rotten, almost chemical. It lasted a few minutes, then faded as quickly as it came. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I packed a few bags, called Peter, and told him I was leaving. He didn't argue. I think he could hear in my voice that I wasn't coming back. I moved into a friend's spare room the same day. I didn't think about that place again for a while. I kept telling myself there was probably a dead animal in the wall or under the floor. Maybe a pipe leak or some kind of mold producing that smell. Old houses hide all kinds of unpleasant surprises. 2 months later, while scrolling through a local hackneyed tenants group online, I saw a post that made my stomach drop. It had a photo of the exact same studio, same slanted ceiling, same layout, and the caption said, "Anyone else hearing movement behind the locked door?" The post was from a new tenant, a woman who'd moved in recently. She wrote that she'd started hearing faint shifting sounds around 3 a.m. from inside that sealed room. She described the same fabric rustling I'd heard, the same timing, even the same faint smell coming through the crack under the door. Other people commented. Most said old buildings creak, that it was probably nothing. But someone else who claimed to have lived there years before me replied that they'd had the same experience too. Always around the same hour, always from that same room. It made my chest tighten. I scrolled through the comments again, over and over, reading every small detail. None of us had ever seen anything. No one had proof. But the sounds, the smell, they were all the same. I started thinking back to when Peter opened that door. The vacuum cleaner, the folded boxes, the layer of dust that didn't seem as thick as it should have been. I remembered how the air inside had felt dry but heavy, like a room that hadn't been truly empty for long. I remembered the faint, stale smell. Not strong enough to notice then, but there, under everything else. For weeks after reading that post, I kept replaying the noise in my head, that soft rustling. The way it seemed careful, almost deliberate. Like whoever or whatever was inside didn't want to be heard but couldn't help moving. I don't know if there was a crawl space behind the wall or an old entrance from the basement that no one knew about. London houses are layered with decades of modifications, hidden corners, forgotten rooms. Maybe someone had found their way into that space years ago and never truly left. I never contacted the new tenant. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound strange. But sometimes I wonder what she ended up doing. Whether she stayed long enough for the smell to come back stronger, or if she left like I did, without looking too closely. Every now and then, I'll be scrolling through listings or looking for another place to rent, and I'll see a similar flat, same neighborhood, same old townhouse style, and I'll feel that small knot of unease in my stomach, because it's easy to imagine a sealed room staying sealed for years, with something inside that shifts only when the lights are out. Just enough to remind you that you're not as alone as you think. And the worst part is, you never really know what was behind that door. Maybe nothing. Or maybe something that learned how to stay quiet until the next tenant moves in. I live at the edge of a small desert neighborhood in Arizona, on the very last row of houses before the land turns to scrub and rock. Behind my fence there's nothing, just a wide stretch of dirt, dry bushes, and the occasional coyote that passes through at night. The closest street light is half a block away, so when the sun goes down, it's pitch black out there. That's why I installed a motion light on the back fence a few months ago. It's bright, and it's sensitive enough to catch movement from about 20 feet away. Usually it's rabbits or wind-blown weeds that set it off. That night in March it was quiet. The air was cool, a little windy, the kind of stillness that makes every small sound carry. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, half asleep. It was around 11:30 p.m. I remember because I had just checked the time, thinking I should probably put the phone down soon. Then the motion light in the backyard came on. The flash of white through my curtains caught my eye immediately. I didn't think much of it at first. The light goes off sometimes when a coyote crosses the lot. I opened my camera feed to the backyard. It's a simple security setup with 2 wireless cameras. The feed showed the fence, the lot behind it, the light shining down on the dirt. Nothing moved. I watched for about 30 seconds. No coyote, no wind. The bushes weren't even moving. Then the light went off again. A few minutes later, it came on a second time. That got my attention. I stared at the feed again, still nothing. Just the same empty dirt lot and the faint outline of my fence. The desert was silent. It bothered me because the sensor shouldn't have gone off twice with no visible movement. I decided to get up and check. I grabbed my flashlight and went out through the back door, barefoot on the cold concrete. The air smelled like dust and sage. The light on the fence was still on, flooding the yard with its harsh glare. Everything looked normal. The trash bin was by the gate, the rake leaning against the wall, the dry grass still. I swept my flashlight across the yard, then over the fence. Nothing but the flat, empty lot stretching into darkness. I stood there for a minute listening. No footsteps, no rustling, no sound at all except a faint hum from the highway far off. I was about to turn around when something caught the corner of my eye. I glanced toward my bedroom window and froze. There was a face there. It was faint in the light, half hidden by the reflection, but I saw it clearly enough to know it was real. A pale face, eyes fixed forward, just above the bottom edge of the glass. What made it worse was the height. My window sits about 7 feet off the ground outside. Whoever it was had to be standing on something to look in. My whole body went cold. I couldn't even shout. I just stood there staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then the light flicked off again, plunging the yard into darkness. When it came back on a second later, the face was gone. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I went straight to the bedroom and looked through the window from the inside. Nothing. The motion light stayed on for another minute, then clicked off again. I checked the camera feed, rewound it, paused, replayed it. Nothing. Not a single frame showed anyone near the window or even close to the fence. That was impossible. I saw a person. I was sure of it. But the cameras didn't catch anything. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch with the lights on, trying to convince myself that it had been a trick of the light. Maybe my reflection somehow, though I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I went out to check the yard again. There were drag marks in the dirt. 2 parallel lines starting from where the trash bin normally sat and ending right below my bedroom window. The bin itself had been moved, pulled tight against the wall, the lid half open. There were scuff marks around it, and one of the handles had a faint smudge that looked like it came from a glove or dirty hand. That was when it really hit me that someone had been there. Someone had moved that heavy bin quietly enough that I didn't hear it from inside. They must have used it to stand on and look in through my window. The thought made my stomach twist. I spent the rest of the morning walking the fence line, checking for gaps. There weren't any. The ground on the other side of the fence sloped slightly downward into the desert lot, which meant whoever it was had climbed over. The sand was packed down near one corner, like a boot had stepped there recently. I couldn't tell how long ago, but it wasn't old. I reported it later that afternoon. The officer who came out walked around with me, looked at the marks and nodded like he'd seen this before. He said it could have been someone from one of the homeless camps farther out in the desert, or just a random trespasser. But that didn't make me feel any better. For a few nights after that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every small sound outside made me tense. The motion light came on once or twice, but every time I checked, it was just the wind or a stray cat. Still, I couldn't shake the image of that face. After a week, I replaced the old cameras with new wired ones, added 2 more floodlights, and locked the trash bin inside the garage. I tried to convince myself it was over, but even now I still think about it. Because here's what doesn't sit right with me. The cameras didn't catch anything. I checked every angle, every frame. If the person came from the lot behind, they would have crossed at least one of the camera's views. But they didn't. The only explanation is that they were already there, hiding somewhere behind the fence in the dark, waiting. And they didn't just look through my window once. They triggered the light twice. The first time must have been when they were moving the bin into place. The second time, when they climbed up on it. I've tried to imagine what they were doing there, standing on that bin, staring through the window. There's no reason for it except curiosity or something worse. The idea that someone was out there, close enough to touch the glass, watching me without a sound, still makes my skin crawl. I keep the blinds shut now, even during the day. The motion light still works and I still glance at the feed every night before bed. Most nights it stays dark, quiet, and empty, just like it should. But sometimes around that same hour, 11:30, maybe a bit later, the light flicks on again for no reason. I always tell myself it's the wind, or a rabbit, or just bad luck. I never go outside to check anymore. Because if someone really was there that night, standing 7 feet up, staring through the glass, it means they came prepared. They knew where to stand, how to move without a sound, how to avoid the cameras. They knew I'd see the light come on and go out again. Maybe they were testing how close they could get before I noticed. Maybe that night wasn't the first time. I don't know if they ever came back. But when the light flickers on out there, and the desert stays quiet, I just lie still and watch the glow fade away through the curtains, waiting for morning to come. It was late February 2024, one of those gray, stale weeks when the sky never really clears, and the light through the blinds looks like dirty dishwater. I was working from home, same routine as always. Laptop open on the small desk by the window, muted conference calls, too much coffee. I lived alone then, in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a small building on the east side of town. Nothing fancy, beige carpets, humming refrigerator. The faint smell of whatever my downstairs neighbor cooked drifting up through the vents. The building had one of those modern key fob systems, the kind that locks automatically when the door shuts. You needed the fob to get back in. It gave me a weird sense of comfort, especially since I spent most days alone. No one could just walk in, not even maintenance, without notice. That day started normal. I logged into work around 9, checked emails, and worked through a spreadsheet that had been sitting in my inbox all week. I remember it was raining lightly outside, that soft, misty kind that sticks to the windows instead of falling. The sound of it mixing with the steady hum of my computer fans was oddly calming. Around 2 in the afternoon, I decided to take a break and make another cup of coffee. I stretched, got up from the chair, and walked to the kitchen. The air in there always felt cooler, maybe because of the tile floor. My phone was lying on the counter next to the coffee maker, screen on. I hadn't used it in at least an hour. The Uber app was open. For a second, I didn't even register what I was looking at. Then I noticed that an active ride request had just been placed. Pick up my address. Destination: an abandoned industrial park about 10 miles south of the city. I hadn't touched the phone. I was certain of that. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. The request was live. A driver was already on the way. I canceled it immediately, thinking maybe I had pocket-tapped something or the app glitched. But even that didn't make much sense. The screen had been dark, locked. I opened my ride history to check. The trip was there, time-stamped, my full address, the industrial park listed clearly. I felt a small wave of unease, but I brushed it off. Technology messes up sometimes and apps can misfire. Maybe a software bug. I deleted the Uber app, restarted the phone, and went back to my desk. The rest of the afternoon was quiet. I joined another meeting, sent off a report, and forgot about it for a while. Around 4, the light from outside started fading into that dim, colorless winter shade. I turned on the lamp by the desk. It buzzed faintly. I had earbuds in, listening to someone talk about performance metrics, when I heard a small sound from the hallway. It was the door handle. Just a soft metallic rattle, quick, like someone testing it. I froze. Then it turned firmly this time, twice. The sound of the latch clicking inside the mechanism was clear. Someone was trying to open it. I pulled the earbuds out. The handle stopped moving. For a few seconds, there was only the faint hum of the fridge and the rain tapping the window. Then footsteps, slow, careful, shifting right outside my door. I stood up, walked quietly over, and looked through the peephole. A man stood there, maybe mid-30s, wearing an Uber driver vest over a gray hoodie. He had a phone in his hand, screen lit up, and he looked confused. He wasn't aggressive, just standing there, glancing at the door, at his phone, then back again. I didn't open the door. I didn't say anything at first. He said something I couldn't hear clearly, so I leaned closer. His voice came muffled through the wood. Something like, "You called for a ride." I told him through the door that I hadn't ordered anything, that he must have the wrong address. He held his phone up to the peephole, showing his screen. I could see my name, my exact address, the same destination from earlier, that industrial park. I told him again I hadn't ordered it. After a few moments of standing there, he looked back at his phone, shrugged, and left. I watched through the peephole as he walked down the hallway, checked the door number again, and disappeared down the stairs. I locked the deadbolt, even though the door already locked automatically, and stood there for a while, heart pounding in my chest. I knew what that meant. The request that had appeared earlier, that glitch, hadn't been a random bug. It had actually gone through, but how? The app had used my account, my payment method, my IP address. My phone had been in my apartment the entire time. I sat back down at the desk, trying to reason it out. Maybe my phone was compromised somehow, hacked, or some malware got in. Maybe someone cloned my number. It was possible, though the thought of that didn't feel much better. A couple of hours later, I contacted Uber support. They pulled up the record. The representative confirmed the ride had been ordered from my account using my credentials and originating from my home IP address. So, I asked, you're saying it came from inside my apartment? The reply was careful, polite, but it said yes. It looked that way. That night I barely worked. I kept pacing between the door and the windows, checking the locks, checking my phone, checking every closet. The apartment wasn't big. One main room, a short hallway, bathroom, and a small bedroom. I opened every door, looked behind furniture, even pulled open the bottom drawers of the kitchen cabinets like I was expecting to find something. Nothing. I tried to think rationally. Maybe there was some kind of system error. Maybe Uber logged my IP wrong. But the idea of that man standing there, holding a phone with my name and my address, kept replaying in my head. I decided to go through everything electronic in the apartment. My router sat near the TV, small black box with a few blinking lights. I checked its device list through my laptop. 2 devices connected, my phone, my laptop. That was it. No strangers, no unknown MAC addresses. Then I checked my phone again. I reinstalled Uber to look at the trip details. Everything was still there. I looked at the timestamp. The request had been placed at exactly 2:02 p.m. I tried to remember what I was doing at that moment. I was still at my desk. I think typing out an email. The app had been open in the background, but locked. It would have needed a Face ID scan to do anything. My phone hadn't left the counter all day. I left my phone face down that night, on the coffee table. Every small sound in the apartment made me tense. The refrigerator clicking off, the pipes creaking. Around midnight, I turned off all the lights except the one in the hallway and sat on the couch, listening. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning, I changed every password I had, email, bank, Uber, everything. I deleted and reinstalled my apps, ran antivirus scans, reset the router. Still, the thought wouldn't leave me alone, that the request had been made while I was home, with no sign of anyone else being there. A few days later, I went to the building management office and asked if maintenance had entered my apartment recently. They said no, and reminded me that with the fob lock system, every entry gets logged. They checked the records. The last time anyone had entered my unit was 3 weeks before, when I'd let in a technician to fix the smoke detector. No one else had accessed it. I even called Uber again, hoping for some explanation. They confirmed again that everything about the request was legitimate. No signs of external interference, no duplicated account. They couldn't tell me more. After that, I started noticing small things that made me uneasy. My office chair slightly turned in the morning when I woke up. The hall light switch flipped down even though I always left it up. My router would reset itself once or twice a day, the lights flickering like someone had unplugged it for a second. I couldn't prove any of it meant anything. Maybe I was just hyper-aware after what happened. But it felt like something, or someone, had been there, maybe once, maybe just enough to touch something, use something, place a call, then leave. I moved out 2 months later. I didn't even break the lease. I paid the penalty and left early. The new place was smaller, older, no smart locks, no fobs, just a simple deadbolt and a chain. I haven't had any more strange Uber requests since then, but every time I make coffee and see my phone on the counter, I still check the screen, just to be sure nothing's open that shouldn't be, and I keep thinking about that driver standing outside my old apartment, confused, holding his phone up to the door. Someone had wanted to go to that industrial park. Someone had used my name, my account, my IP address. Whoever it was, they'd been inside my home long enough to do it, and I never even saw them leave.